A lot of times in my work, of working in a nonprofit for over the last 10 years, is that, we would come across a lot of different young people. And we look at behaviors, and a lot of stuff we're looking at the violence in the community right now, we're looking at education, and we're looking at all those different things. And we try to solve them by looking at it like that. We look at the symptoms, all right? And so I said, you know what, let's really go back a little bit more and find out these are all symptoms that are going on in education and violence and all that. Let's go back to when was the game changer. So first up, I put together a panel today just to help us, give us some insight. They're gonna help us bring us way back to the kind of 1985, 86 and what was going on in the scene. And I'd like to bring them all up one by one. Gail Forbes Harris, will you please come up? She's with the Boston Public Schools. She's now heading a re-entry initiative for kids that dropped out of Boston Public Schools. So if you have any cousins and all that dropped out, and people, neighbors, you could go see her, all right? Next, I wanna bring up Greg Davis, who's in charge of a program called Metro Boston Alive. And if you know what that is, it's kind of diagonally across from the post office. Superintendent Paul Joyce. And when I called him, I said, I'm doing this session. He said, you know what, Chip, I want to make sure, he had a family thing going on today, and he rearranged it to make sure that he came here today. So I want to thank you for coming here today. All right, Anthony Mosley, KT, as we know, pastor. Is a good friend of mine in high school. Has been around in the music, rap game, all that, and is here as starting a new program and so forth, all right? The preface today is Crack Pass. Join panelists in the discussion on the arrival of the crack epidemic in Boston in the mid-'80s and '90s and their perspective on its effects on Boston's Black communities and families. The first person I want to start off with is a cousin of mine, by marriage, Greg Davis, all right?
Good morning. I grew up in Boston in the late 80s into the 90s. I was clinical director at Demic Detox, and then I left there and I went into the Boston Housing Authority as a drug intervention coordinator. And from there, I had founded an organization called Metro Boston Alive. And the reason why we named it Metro Boston Alive is because, you ever seen that commercial? I'm just not the salesman, I'm also a member with the hair. So I'm in recovery. I've been straight for over 25 years. And I felt like it was time to give something back. In my work in the substance abuse field, and particularly working with young folks, I used to work for a foundation called Chemical Dependency Foundation, in which I traveled all around the United States, talking with coaches and athletes around drugs. And one of the things I used to always tell young people is that they have to learn to become historians. Because once you understand the history, you get a better idea on how you're going to respond to what's going on today. When I was growing up, we were smoking herb, marijuana. We was doing this thing called shake 'em up. And I tell you, I didn't do that because I needed to do that because I just wanted to get high. I did those things because it did something to me. I was one of those guys that used to go to the dance halls and stuff and stand on the wall with my hand in my pocket looking cool, but I was actually afraid because I couldn't dance, and I was afraid of girls. I liked them, but I was afraid of them. But as soon as I took me a little shake 'em up and a little marijuana, my whole attitude changed. I could dance, I could have fun. So drugs at that particular time did for me what I couldn't do for myself. But little did I know about this thing called progression, that the more I use, the more I'm gonna want, and the more it's gonna have an impact on me down the road. I have come from a place that there's an equation that says D plus A equals P equals LTP. Drugs and alcohol equals pleasure equals long-term pain. But now let me give you the history about crack. It may surprise some of you all, but politically, I believe that the heroin was for me. Because when we started using it, we ended up using it and couldn't get back. We was out of this world. We didn't want the world to have nothing to do with us, because when I was in the Nod, it was all over. I didn't care what was going on, but when I got really tough, I found myself doing a number of years in Walpole State Prison. 80% of the folks that are incarcerated have some drug history. Our sons and daughters was like, I'm not doing that. I might smoke a little herb, but there's no way I'm gonna use that heroin or whatever that stuff is. So I might sell it, but I ain't using it. Never knowing that, you know, for a better example, monkeys can't sell bananas. They are at risk and didn't know that. So as we began to disappear and our sons and daughters started having problems, the anchor, the person who held the family together, was the woman. All the pressures that she had on her. All of a sudden, she checked out this thing called crack, and she never was able to get back.
People to know, today is about getting many people's perspectives. We're going to hear from former dealers' perspectives, former people that have been involved with crack cocaine.
I've been working for the Boston Public Schools for over 34 years, and I've had the pleasure of educating and teaching a lot of children who are now young adults. Many of them have children themselves, and really working along with families, something that I enjoy more than anything in the world right about now. One of the things that I've really come to understand and realize is that many of the families within the greater Boston area struggle with many things. And the connection with just the way the world is and the way situations are, poverty, lack of having. But I think the one thing that they have, and it's really been the most of that, is realizing who they are and the gift of life and what that really does. As Greg was talking about, I think when you think of women in Boston and their roles in raising families and children, that's where the greatest struggle becomes and needs to be reconnected. So as an educator, a longtime educator, I'm going to start with reading, and it's one thing that I do. I read often and enjoy reading to children. That was something that, as a teacher, you find. So I'm just going to share with you just a piece that clearly speaks to what today is about. A baby girl is born in Boston 3 months early. She weighs less than 3 pounds and clings to life through a tangle of tubes and wires that provide what her mother cannot: intensive care. A 5-year-old in Los Angeles bounces from foster home to foster home, wearing down would-be caregivers with his outbursts. When things do not go his way, he kicks, he screams, he rips at his hair, and bangs his head on the walls. A girl is found dead in a New York apartment. Her neck is broken, but she also has a broken arm, cuts and bruises on her face, and welts on her buttocks. She was 5 years old. Her 9-year-old brother was luckier, but only a little. Police found him in a closet with both legs and 8 other bones broken. Covered with bruises, he was hiding from the monsters who hurt him, his crack addict parents. Extreme cases in some ways, but drugs don't get any more extreme than crack. And people don't get any more strung out on any other substance. That's why we put together this pamphlet, because even though we're used to seeing drug problems trickle down in the form of poverty and disease and neglect to children of addicts, there's something new and terrible this time around.
I've been a police officer 28 years. I was in the first gang unit in 1988, and that's where I'm going to start my discussion. The spring of 1988, the Boston Police Department started to see the formation of gangs in the city. We had roughly about 15 gangs, less than 500 kids involved. I think our response to not only gangs, but that coinciding with the crack cocaine epidemic that hit the city was a little bit of denial. We weren't ready for it, and almost from the start we were playing catch-up. I think we lacked a real strategic plan, and I think we focused on suppression as the way that we could get out of this mess that we were in. Over the next 2 years, we probably went through the most difficult time in our history as a police department. We saw Tiffany Moore killed in August of 1988, sitting on a mailbox up on Humboldt Ave, caught in the crossfire between two gangs. We went through Charles Stewart. We went through stop and frisk. In all of these areas, we failed. By 1990, we had 152 homicides in the city, the most ever. In 1989, we had 100 shootings in 40 days. And during that time, we would experience roughly about 600 shootings in a year. That was an incredibly difficult time for this city. And I think our response from all aspects, whether it was community or police or city, fell short of what we should have been doing. So we paid a big price for that. I think by the mid-90s, we started to learn some lessons. We knew we had to do business differently because we had lost so much trust with the community between 1988 and 1990 that we had a lot of work to do. In 1994, Mayor Menino comes into office. Paul Evans becomes the police commissioner for the next 10 years, so there was a lot of stability in the city. And we adopted our community policing philosophy. So we started to understand that intervention and prevention were equally as important in the work that we do as making arrests. And when I was in the gang unit, I worked with a really proactive group of officers. We interacted with gang members every night, and we all talked about that the vast majority of kids that we dealt with had tremendous potential. But we were also seeing that there were young, disadvantaged kids looking to access the economy and make money. Like, we get that. And people made runs. People dressed really nice. There was a sense of self-esteem, sense of morale, I think a sense of greed. And we went through those same experiences as those young men. Now, I come from a different perspective, so I knew half the story going on. But over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot more work in the history of what took place in this city in the past 22 to 23 years, and I've been really educated by the young men that grew up during that period of time. During the mid-90s, we had about 61 gangs in the city, about 1,300 gang members. That was the work done with the Boston Gun Project and Operation Ceasefire. We started to understand that if we partnered with law enforcement agencies, worked with the community, worked with the clergy, we could start to make a difference in our neighborhoods, and we could start to rebuild that trust that we had lost. By 1999, there were 31 homicides in the city, the lowest ever. We went 2.5 years without a young person being the victim of homicide by firearm. They refer to that as the Boston Miracle, which is clearly overstated. It was just, we pooled all of our resources and we made a big difference in this city. And I was in charge of the gang unit during the 90s, and I was in the homicide unit in the late 90s. So I was able to have a lot of experiences in this area. Between 1988 and 1997, there were still 300 unsolved homicides of young African-American males in our neighborhoods of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan that were involved in gangs. The federal authorities becoming involved in this issue led to a lot of young men going to jail for a very long time. Some are still away for the distribution of crack and the violence that took place during that time. When I was in homicide, I was assigned to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and look at unsolved homicides that had occurred from 1988 to 1997. And in 2 of those cases, it was only an enforcement component that could have changed the outcome of 2 of them. One was Marlon Pazzoli, who was convicted of homicide in 1996. He was wrongfully convicted. And as a result of an investigation and people coming forward who were clearly looking at their lives being affected for 25 to 50 years, shared what happened in that. So Marlon Pasley was released. And the other case was Jermaine Goffigan, a 9-year-old boy that was killed on Halloween 1994. Donnell Johnson was arrested and convicted of that homicide. Donnell Johnson did not commit that homicide. An investigation into the Heath Street development and the crack trade led to one young man coming forward and reopening that whole case to the point where Donnell Johnson was released, and the 2 individuals who were responsible for that were indicted and pled guilty to that. So the damage done was an incredible damage to this city that has played out over the past 22 years. Today's challenge is different for us. We're seeing about 120 gangs in the city, about 3,500 kids involved in gang activity in some way. But the motivations of those first groups of young men that became involved in this are no longer there. Law enforcement in this city is very good. We partner with everybody. There is no anonymity. When we see 90% of our shootings happen in 3 neighborhoods on any given year, and the size of this city, we know everybody. But the motivations of accessing the economy and making money in the drug trade, it's not there anymore. We have young men who are now motivated by violence and the threat of violence. We have a lack of organization, a lack of structure. We have feuds and alliances that change daily. We have a much more chaotic picture, and we have a much higher level of dysfunction among the young men that we're dealing with today.
And I definitely want to thank the superintendent for that history lesson. I was aware of a couple of the things that he touched upon, but not actually all of them. But for myself, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the city of Cambridge. I was born and raised in Cambridge. And I can't sit up here and say that, I came from a broken family. My house, we had problems. I mean, it was a struggle in my household because it was a one-parent household, because my father was in the military and he was moved all over the place. And it's kind of difficult to take your wife and 6 children all over the world with you. So the option was to stay in Cambridge. I was an average kid. I had a lot of family in Roxbury and Dorchester, so I spent a lot of my summers in Boston. And I can't say that any of my family engaged in any negative activity, but I don't know how many remember around 1991 when the economy took a shift. Is the year that I graduated from high school. And when I was graduating, I had a daughter. My daughter was at my high school graduation. And all I could think about after graduation is getting a job. I need to take care of my daughter. So I'm applying to jobs and I'm going out trying to get a job, and I couldn't. Now I'm hanging out, and my cousin comes up to me and he has on new clothes, jewelry. And I'm like, hold on, this kid is a certified bum. Now he's fresh. So I asked him, I said, where'd you get the money for that? Because I'm thinking maybe he got a job somewhere and he can fill me in on the details so I could get a job there. And he says, oh, I'm hustling, I'm on the block. And I said, hustling? So what are you hustling? He's like, moving that crack, I'm moving that crack. I was like, really? My first instinct was, man, you better stop doing that, you're gonna get locked up, you better stop doing that. He's like, no, it's easy. I told myself, I'm just gonna do this for a little while until I get on my feet. That was the story that I was telling myself. But as time, progresses, not only did I get on my feet, I got on my feet and got off of my feet into a car, into a house, and into all types of things. But my thing is, my operation on the street only lasted about 4 months, because as you're starting to hustle, like the officer mentioned, that you get savvy. You start putting business ethic to work in what you're doing at the negative aspect. And I'm saying to myself, if it only took me 20 minutes to make $220, what could I make if I stayed out here 8 hours? So I would stay out on the back streets for 8 hours, and I would do something called a graveyard shift. I would come in at 12 o'clock at night and hang out until 4 o'clock in the morning. So I'd be out, and the police would be out, but they're not on the back streets like that. And so I would be out until 4 in the morning, and before I knew it, 6 months later, I wasn't even on the block anymore. I was buying 2 and 3 kilos of cocaine at a time. And the thing is I was in a situation where I didn't have to pay for anything up front. The Connect was saying, here, you take these 3 kilos of cocaine, and I'll see you on Friday. But at the end of that being the way out, now I'm scarred for life because I'm a convicted felon for drug trafficking. So every time I go to do something, that pops up on my record. But through the grace of God, I've been in situations where they say, we don't care about what you did 10 years ago. What can you do for us now? And so what I say is, in my experience, is that, you know, if I had it all to do all over again, or if I could have that conversation with a 15-year-old, I would tell them it's not worth it. Because they're only one of a few things that are gonna occur. I have a friend who's in prison now for 17 years for being caught with a half a kilo of crack cocaine. I have friends who are dead because they thought they could go and make that last deal and didn't make it. But here I stand, and Chip reached out to me, and when he said crack, I said, oh man, I hear crack and I cringe sometimes.
So I was about, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, just going through it, seeing drug dealers coming in my house. You know what I mean? My mom's always in the room. She always kept me away from it. But I knew what was going on. I mean, I'm 7, 8 years old. I know what's going on. I'm a kid, but I already know. So she tried her best to keep it away from me. But you see the same people coming in and out of the house like every hour, every half an hour. You're like, damn, why they coming back and forth into my house like this? What's going on? So eventually it just became just a constant scene. And I knew what was going on, and it was tough for me. But I was 8, 9 years old. I couldn't stop it. So I just automatically just became a rebel. My mother couldn't tell me nothing. She's doing horrible, you know what I mean? So I was in and out of the house, doing whatever, being, like I didn't care about nothing, didn't care about life. Crack destroyed my childhood. Cause first I was a victim as a child, seeing my moms go through it with crack. Now I'm getting turned out, cause the neighborhood I moved in was nothing but drug dealers. All older than me. At this time, I'm like 11 years old, 12 years old maybe. So all these dudes is older than me. You know what I mean? So they're like, yeah, I guess this is a new kid on the block, we gonna turn him out. So I'm like, all right, so the first dude I met around there, and I'll never forget this dude. He's the one that turned me on, and I'll just say his name is L. It's my man L. You know what I mean? It all started. He gave me my first packet. It was like 10 rocks, and like he said, it wasn't just an 8-ball. I started off small. He gave me like 10 rocks. He told me to give him back It was a $100 package. He told me to give him back 70 and keep 30 for myself. So this went on for a while until it started getting growing and growing and growing, and I'm seeing what's going on, and I'm like, I'm giving this dude all this money when I need to be making this money. So it just came time and time, and like my mom's, she's still messed up off of crack right now, and she's been in program after program after program, and all I can do is be a positive son and keep away from all the negativity. You know what I mean? Like I said, crack really destroyed my childhood. All I did was see it growing from my age of 6 years old to now. And I seen a couple of my brothers come through the door. They already know what time it is. Like, I don't know who brought this thing called crack in the world, but I know it's people like me that's going through the same thing, man. You know what I mean? And right now, I work for the Department of Youth Services. So I see the kids every day, and they're spitting images of me, have no regard for life, don't care, and think nobody cares and nobody knows their situations. But crack destroyed my life, man, and if we can do anything as a community to make this thing better, to try to get it away or get it out of here. I know it's probably not gonna leave, but whatever we can do, I'm all for it. And we just need to come together as one, as best as we can to try to help this community, man. Chip, thanks for having me here, man. Appreciate it.
What responsibility did you have with crack cocaine? How did you see it affect your own families and your ability to actually work around it, or how did you adapt to it, all right, with crack cocaine in your own lives? When you seen it happen with family members, how did your generation were able to handle that? As we break up by generation to share insights, how crack cocaine has affected each generation, and share how your generation's particular strategy, how they have coped with the epidemic.
I often get asked in my role as president of NAACP, well, what got you through all of that? If you did it, couldn't they do it? And it's funny, I think back to all those situations I've been in, all the cars I've been in that I got out of right before the police stopped the car, or the corner I was on right before they busted the corner, or the shooting that took place right 5 minutes after I left. And I say, I'm mad lucky. And actually, spiritually, I'm blessed. So I think back to, which I think is a little history to this. If you talk about the abuse, the neglect, the disrespect of black communities going back a long time.
But in the beginning, I remember, it was an ammonia-based or an ammonia mixture thing. Then it basically just went to straight freebase, cooking cocaine with baking soda and water in a test tube or Pyrex jar, coming up with your crack rocks. Now, I came up on Humboldt Avenue, so at any given day, on the block there would be, 27 people, all with the same, dime, 20, whatever, and fiends were like running through a gauntlet, and people were like, elbow, you want my thing, you don't want this thing, whatever. But now, so what happened between cocaine and heroin in the 70s? Freebasing already exists. Where did this thing crack come from?
I'm really glad that we're having this sort of a forum. It's really healing for all of us because we're all impacted around this crack for over 25 years. I'm a workforce development professional. I help folks to transition into either occupational skills training or employment opportunities. I guess my question would be, why? Because I'm thinking that being incarcerated, you still have an opportunity to at least complete high school, if not coming out with other skills.
All right, and you know what? A lot of the times we work with young people today in 2011, we really don't look at the effects of that, all right? The whole piece is regarding the residual effects of what crack cocaine has did to us in 1986, how it comes out in our education system and how youth on youth violence and so forth. So today, what I decided to do is bring people that have been impacted by crack cocaine here to talk about a panel about how these things and how crack cocaine has inflicted their own lifestyles so we can, as a group, together move forward. So we have lawyers here together, we have judges, we have former crackheads, we have former crack users, we have people in health professionals, we have nurses, all here to talk about it and how ways that we can heal as a community as restorative justice. So today has been a learning experience. I've learned a lot. People I know in the neighborhood have stood up and gave individual testimonies, and that's what today is about. And we're all about to learn from each other and move forward, all right? Glad to be here. I hope you can continue on and be a part of this panel. Chip Greenidge, Run 2.